Welcome to Chapter 2. This topic will be on network security threats. Today's learning objectives are to recognize the impact of malicious exploits that attacks have on network security. The key concepts are hackers and their motivations, the hacking process, hardware failure, physical threats, accidents, and other disasters. We'll also discuss common types of malware, and then social engineering practices and their impact on network security efforts. So the question comes, why do hackers do this? What is their motivation? Some do it for the thrill of it, others do it for the hobby. Some like the challenge of it, others do it for peer pressure and social validation. Some do it for street cred, others do it for status. More and more we're seeing people do it for money and financial gain. We have some who do social activism, and they attack based on perceived social injustice. And others do it for power, just to, see if they can and if they can use it for extortion means. So these are a lot of reasons why people hack and try and do that kind of thing. Let's take a look at hackers and their motivation more. There are three primary types of hackers that have been defined by this book. The first one are recreational hackers. These are the folks that enjoy learning and exploring and seeing what they can do with computer technology. They try and do a lot of things. They can either be testing on their own equipment and seeing what they can accomplish, or sometimes if they don't have it, they test on other people's stuff without permission. So these can be out there. Next is opportunistic hacking. They were described as being timid. Not likely to initiate an attack, but will take advantage of the right opportunity. So if they're out there and they see that, a database they're looking at is open to SQL injection, and they want to dump the whole thing or download it themselves, they'll try and do that. And then finally we have the professional hackers. These are described as criminals whose whole career objective is to compromise IT infrastructures. There's also professional hackers out there that work for nation states and do it for espionage purposes. So these are some folks out there that we want to kind of watch out for. All right. Now the favorite targets of hackers, well, of course, are the easy assets, those that can pay off quickly. This is why healthcare, who was notoriously not spent a lot of money in their IT infrastructure and all that, because, they find that training medical personnel is quite difficult and costly, and they want to save money where they can. So that's one of the areas where you see an easy, quick target. A lot of times they do it for where they can get monetary or barter gain, funds, cryptocurrency, bank accounts, and a lot of times they'll try and take control of networks, as in the case of ransomware, where they'll demand, something out there. Occasionally you find unique targets, like where somebody will try and hack a military organization or political or police organization for something to see if they can do it. And then the others will go after complex infrastructures, like large corporations and stuff like that. They will go after to see what they can get into. They also like easy targets. If it's not properly secured, if they have open ports, if they have things where, they haven't patched their systems in a while, those are pretty easy targets to hit. So these are favorite targets of hackers out there. Now, as we look, we can see that there are threats from the internet personnel and external entities. One of our favorite common things are on-site employees. These are kind of insiders They have access physically to the network and facility. Uh, One such hacker was a guy named Ghost Exodus, located in the Dallas area. He hacked into the hospital system where he was a security guard. If you want to, you can go just Google Ghost Exodus or Darknet Diaries and read about him there, or listen to the podcast about him. So he had actual physical access. He has logical access to the network. He was able to check everything else out. So these are folks that are on site and they are just poking around the network. To address employee threats in your security policy and network design infrastructure, an ongoing management system, you need to create barriers internal and do segmentation. NIST 800.207, called Zero Trust Architecture, is something that should be explored in your studies to help you get a better understanding of the strategies out there for that. I'll probably post a link to that in your notes in this chapter, and you can feel free to look that up yourself or pursue it on your own. We also see there's common threats to network security, insider threats. These can be the disgruntled employees who believe they've been wronged by the organization. A few years ago, a San Francisco administrator was being fired, and they let him know that in advance that he was going to be fired because he saw his name in the list of employees to be terminated. And so what he did is he went and deleted everybody's administrative account and encrypted everything and basically walked out the door. Now, there's another thing that's been happening recently. Lapsus is a Brazilian-based hacking organization, and what they've been doing is they've been finding contract employees whose contracts are nearing the expiration of their contract, and they're offering them a sum of money to let them have their credentials. And so they got into Microsoft and they paid the man so much money, and he had like 2 weeks left on his contract. He knew it wasn't going to get renewed, so he let him have access, and he took a sum of like $10,000, $20,000 or something from him. And when the two-factor authentication came in, he approved it, and they logged in the Teams, and they were able to access some Microsoft source code for Bing, the project he was working on. And of course, the one that we are all aware of, the external threats. And these are the nasty old hackers we see on the internet. Now, what's the difference between internal and external hackers? Well, internet hackers, they have to get through a lot more hoops than a hacker, that is inside your private LAN. So hackers can talk between corporations. You might try and find, you work for company A, B, C, D, and somebody, there's another hacker who works for company MNOP. Well, company MNOP wants to get something from A, B, C, D, so they establish a line of communications, and they can sometimes, get the hacker to provide access to that internal LAN, or actually exfiltrate that information for them for a competing organization. So we have hackers that can be insider threats, or external threats for that. So we have a lot of things out there that are competing and not. So the hacking process is broken down into these steps: reconnaissance, scanning, enumeration, then attacking. At that point, you either go to fallback attacks if they fail, or post-attack activities. So these are the 5 phases of hacking. Now the reconnaissance phase, this is the first step of hacking. This is the initiation where you kind of are out there, doing a fingerprinting of the organization. You're trying to map it out. You're trying to see what it is, footprinting, doing discovery research on them, finding out what the registrars are, looking up the DNS information of the company, and reviewing all their DNS records that are public, all their public, uh, you know, domains what they're registered to, and all that. And you're gathering as much information as you can about an organization that's public. Sometimes this can even be referred to as doxing an organization. And this is called just out there trying to gather that basic information. So examples are check the search engines, Google it, review the organization's website, uh, go on LinkedIn and investigate the background of personnel that are out there, who shows up as members of that company or former members. You perform location mappings, like you go on their career sites and see where they're hiring for, what locations they're in. You go and look at their 10Qs and 10K filings for financial records to see what information might be in there about their company. You can review public court records and other public records for it. You can query WHOIS, the domain registrations, public IP assignments, and all that. From there, you can try and start eavesdropping on email and other conversations. You can also go visit a physical location, check to see what, Wi-Fi might be running in their location, see if there's physical security there, and other such fun activities. After that, now you can move on to the stage where you scan them. And this is used a number of tools like Nmap and other things to kind of get information about their networks and stuff. You're trying to discover their live and active systems. This can include stuff like war driving. War dialing, you don't see much of that anymore. You can do ping sweeps and port scanning of all the IP address records associated with that company. This is kind of also referred to as probing a company to see what's there. You detect what ports are available and what are detectable. Basic TCP/IP. The first thing you need to know about TCP/IP is they do what's called a three-way handshake. So a lot of times you see if you do a scan, it does a successful SYN/ACK response, and then an ACK packet, then you know you have an open port. If you get a SYN packet, you send a SYN packet, and then you get a reset, you know that port is closed. If you do UDP datagram and you don't get a response, you tend to find that port to be open on UDP. If you do it with a closed port, a lot of times you get an ICMP type 3 response, which is not available, basically. All right, so next comes the enumeration. So this is where you're like creating and listing all of your attack targets. You're creating a profile, a dossier, if you would say. And so the hacking process of discovering sufficient detail about the target is to learn what vulnerabilities are out there and if they can successfully create an attack. So you probe the open and closed ports out there, and the open ports usually have a service running behind them. You can look up to see what that service is on that port. A lot of times you can do a telnet to it to grab a banner or SSH to it to see if there's a way to probe and see if there's any banner information about that service that's running on it. So here's a banner grab from a web server. We do whitehouse.gov. You do the Nmap script banner, and you do this. Basically, you're out there and you do an Nmap. It does the connect, and you see it's open on port 80 and 443, and you can get some really good little basic information from them. You can see that the DNS record is coming from Akamai, and there's an IPv6 address also attached to them. So a lot of good information you can get off of that. Now comes the menacing part, the attack. So this is the briefest part of hacking is the attack. The successful attack might occur within seconds, and after that you move to post-attack activities. So if you're able to get in, you pop a shell, you have everything ready to go, and you drop in the stuff, or that's what happens. A failed attack, you pull back, you modify your approach, you relaunch the attack until you get in. You be that advanced persistent threat. So what happens after the attack, you might say? Well, post-attack activities include privilege escalation, which means you're in the system, but now you're trying to get root or administrator privileges. You then will try and deposit additional hacker tools out there. You'll try and steal data. You'll try and create a reentry point backdoor. And then you'll try and remove evidence you were ever there. Other things, depositing hacker tools or even deploying ransomware inside their network or any kind of malware would be something out there to do that are other possibilities for post-attack activities. So, what are some common IT infrastructure threats? Well, hardware failures and other physical threats, if you can cause, let's say, a connect into their system and then cause, let's say, a centrifuge made to separate uranium spin at a different rate than what is being reported, causing it to overheat and break down. That would be a hardware failure, and there are other physical threats you can do. Let's say if you were to hack into an assembly line system and then create some robotic arms to swing around wildly, in a manufacturing line, possibly causing physical injuries to employees working on that line too. Or you could even have something that just, has a fan that, wears out and causes the system to overheat and causing some short circuits on the hardware, causing those to go down. You can have hard drive failures. There's a number of things that can occur to cause different failures or physical threats to systems. Another threat is natural disasters, hurricanes, flooding, um, tornadoes, earthquakes. I was in a data center that was in a subterranean basement, and they thought that was the greatest thing for them because they were in a desert-like environment. A once in 50-year monsoon came about, which caused their basement to flood and all their IT equipment to be under 4 feet of about 4 feet of water. 4 to 5 feet of water went in their data center. So I had kind of warned them about that about a year and a half before, and they kind of, oh no, it's never going to do that again. And just like that, you know, they tempted fate, and fate said, hold my beer, let's go see what, chaos we can create. And then the last one could be considered accidents or um, stuff that was not intended. Uh, in 2001, I had to assist in the recovery next to a building that was affected in the World Trade Center attacks. This building housed a credit union for the city of New York, in which the funds were distributed to employees such as police, fire, medical, uh, nursing, hospital. It was where the payroll was being conducted for all city employees, water, subway, everything. All the different cities employees were getting paid by this system. Well, since the events at the 9/11 World Trade Center terrorist attack occurred, uh, the power to that area was shut off. Their power was removed, and by no means were they able to continue business, and the access was very restricted to the equipment in that building, just like half a block away from where the incident occurred. So they were giving 20 minutes to go up there to remove the hard drives from those servers. And the guy grabbed a couple of pillowcases, ran up 6 flights of stairs, loaded them all into a suit, a into pillowcases that he had used for bags, and ran downstairs. Now he had failed to mark which one they came from, and there was about 30 of them, and we had to play, let's see, randomly put them all together to see which ones started working together correctly. Eventually, after about 20 hours of us connecting them, starting them up, we were able to get a couple of systems going, and then we eventually got the right order back together on some other systems at a disaster recovery impromptu build site. So that's something that is an accident that you have to look at. Uh, Again, some of the common failures are hard drive and hardware failures. These are common causes of downtime. Back it up, make periodic backups, back up to the cloud. Uh, make sure you have a good plan, be prepared. That's the best defense. Make sure, you conduct cleaning and general maintenance. Keep spare parts and replacement equipment on hand available. A lot of times now you're seeing more and more solid state drives that are guesstimated to eliminate problems associated with hard disk drives. But these, are coming down in price, but they cost a lot more. And yes, we are seeing failures in those also because of heat-related shorts and stuff like that. So don't think just because it's a solid state drive it won't fail either. All right, so some of the causes of failure are too much heat, uh, which causes basically soldering to melt and then cause shorts in the system. So the little the solder, crosses over and zip zap zack. And next thing is, many of you have heard of electromagnetic pulses. Well, this is a static electricity discharge, and this will cause a surge of stuff, and it causes a lot of stuff to get melted. Frayed wires. A lot of times there are issues where a wire gets stretched, frayed. This can be like from a rodent getting into the system, into the crawl space, and maybe chewing on a wire, or squirrel, or rat. I had a kitten that loved to eat my iPhone cables. I was at a credit reporting agency, and they kept reporting intermediate issues. And we're trying to figure out what it was, and I'm like, well, I'm seeing something where the network drive comes enabled and then disabled. To me, that's like if somebody's plugging in and unplugging the cable. We went down there, and finally we pulled up the floorboard and looked at it and saw that somebody had wrapped the cable so tight that when they cabled something new, they pulled real hard and it frayed the Ethernet connector into the server, which was causing the problem. So the guy didn't want to, add new cable ties to the thing. So he just kind of gave it a really hard tug, and he ended up causing a wire to get frayed, which was causing a lot of connectivity issues for them in the long run. So they made sure that, we ran a new wire to the server, and poof, all the problems went away once we plugged in a new cable. Moisture is a bad thing to have happen. So a lot of times you see in data centers dehumidifiers. Um, you don't want to like bring a drink in there and spill it on a server. That can end up being very bad. Uh, Intentional electromagnetic interference, where people will bring on a radio or something, and these can cause wackiness. One instance I had where fluorescent lights, the ballasts in the system, were causing, when they would have these certain fluorescent lights they put in, uh, the frequency caused a type of electromagnetic interference, which caused, network degradation because they were not using shielded uh, cable. Another good one I had was theft. Um, they were, I was talking about a guy, and we were working with them in Miami, and he said in their shop, the data center, people would back in big trucks, and they would just bash through their door or through the wall in like a pickup truck. Uh, and they'd run in and just unplug servers and load them in the back of a truck as fast as they could, like about 10 guys, grab as many servers as they could, and then they would take them and they would take off with them. They weren't trying to steal the data, but they were trying to steal the servers at the time, because servers were, some of these devices, $100,000 each, and they would sell them for maybe $5,000-$10,000 and ship them off to. A lot of times they said they were shipping them off to Cuba in boats and selling them in Cuba. So there you go. So there's theft for that. That was an interesting story I had to deal with on that one. Natural disasters. You have the weather events, and you have to understand what's common for your weather in your area. For those of you who ever went on the George Bush over there near Alma and uh, the George Bush Tollway there, you'll see the NTT building. I used to work in that building when it was Dell. Those walls are about, concrete walls there up in that tower are about uh, a foot and a half to 2.5 feet thick. At the base, that building can withstand a direct hit from a F4 tornado, because inside there was a lot of servers and stuff that could deal with that. So since tornadoes are a big threat in our area, they had that building to be where it's almost weatherproof for a tornado. I remember one time I was in there and we had a tornado warning, and I was on a conference call and people were like, "Oh, do you need to take shelter?" I'm like, "Nope, I'm good right where I'm at." I'm actually expecting more people to start showing up in my area from other parts of the complex, because this is where everybody, mustered for that tornado. Uh, so another thing you want to look for risk mitigation purpose is special insurance. Again, we have the lightning protection. If you go and look at some of your buildings, you'll see these like little bitty things that look like wires go around the edge of it. Those are for lightning protection. Most people think they're to keep pigeons off your building, but actually they're to help dissipate lightning. There's surge protectors inside there, and there's ways that stuff is grounded. Data centers and stuff have bilge pumps, so in case water does start to leak, or there is a fire or something that a deluge extinguisher busts, uh, they will be able to pump that water out of there as quickly as it comes in. So that's something that could happen for that. In case there's a fire, they don't want it sitting on the floor affecting other systems. So they'll pump that water out of there faster than it's in there, and they'll push it out real quick. So the best protection is make sure you have backups and make sure they're in a secured offsite facility in case your facility does get hit by a tornado or earthquake or God forbid something else, any other disaster. There are accidents, and we've all seen people spill, something on their laptop or somebody not paying attention and tripping over cables or pulling out the wrong power cord or cable, or sometimes, plugging in too much stuff, tripping the circuit breaker, or a transformer blowing outside, or setting off the sprinklers, or knocking over a computer, turning off the system early, or installing the wrong drivers or software. Um, Again, your best precaution and protection is backing it up, making sure you have good documentation on how to restore it or how to build it again, and have good training and how to have validate your backups. Make sure you test your backups every once in a while. You also need to make adjustments to worker activities when you notice that somebody is doing something that is precarious. Like you see somebody walking into your data center uh, with, one of those big thermoses of coffee or something. You're like, please don't do that. Keep everything, food and drink out of your data centers and stuff like that. And then you also make sure that everybody knows what to do in case there's an accident or an emergency that happens. So one of the things we look at is malicious code. These are software, they can come in like malicious software can come to you in software downloads. Like the NotPetya attack was brought in through a supply chain attack that occurred where people were updating their financial tax software. And so the supplier, the financial software was hacked, and they added it to the software download for their updates. That would be like us doing our TurboTax updates and them having attacked into it and adding malware to that. A lot of times you'll get an email to you saying, "Hey, click on this doc I sent you. It has important information about our agreement," or something like that. A lot of times you might click on, go to the wrong website, like GOAGLE or something.com, GoAgle or something, and that might have malicious website or something on it. Transferring files, going to something like the Pirate Bay might be bad, and that could be there. Sometimes there's just flaws in software that could be bad, and they could cause issues in that where, hey, we can run this certain command and code and cause it to let me have administrative access to the environment. So, yeah, there's different things to do that through that elevation of privilege. Now, effects of malware can be, oh no, I'm going to lose all my data, or I'm going to have my data exposed, or somebody's going to modify my data and I'm not going to know about it. Other things can be poor system performance. You're sitting there and like seeing all these crazy things. In the old days, you'd see pop-up ads. A lot of times the system could be part of a bot army. I know before my mother passed away on her computer, if there was any kind of free downloadable solitaire game or anything like that, she would be happy to download it and play on that. And then she was wondering why she was using so much internet. For fun, I went over there and installed a network sniffer and found out she was part of like several bot armies that were using to attack different things. And she had no clue, but she got to play solitaire games, what she liked to do. All right, so what are some common types of malware as of the writing of this book? We see viruses and worms, Trojan horses, keystroke loggers, spyware and adware, rootkits, logic bombs, trapdoors and backdoors, dialers, URL injectors, exploits, mobile code, and nowadays a lot of stuff we're seeing currently is a lot of ransomware. So a few years ago, there was a thing called the Advanced Persistent Threat, APTs. These were targeted threats toward companies or organizations. Uh, they were appear to be specifically targeted towards certain things. They would send stuff to certain people using phishing and social engineering methods. Um, and we see now that since there's a lot of information about people that they're posting to social media and LinkedIn and stuff, a lot of stuff can be gleaned about different individuals that can be targeted. Now, the occurrence has increased dramatically. Allegedly, it represents a small percentage of attacks, but we see this more and more and more occurring, and this is why training your staff is really imperative at this time. So, what about things? Well, fast growth, and overuse. Um, what are the positives and negatives of this? Uh, Slowing down to build your network with security built in uh, is probably the better to provide sustained growth and longevity, but um, a lot of times a negative is you fail to address security in a period of fast growth, uh, and you can end up resulting in failure. So if you're not, in a nutshell, basically this slide says, make sure you plan everything out, make sure you go slow and methodical, but be adaptive enough to quickly react to new threats and be able to uh, install mitigations to those very quickly and agile, with agile precision. So, yeah, it's the best of both worlds. Either you have stuff where it's going to take you 6 months to implement a new firewall, or if the threats are coming in fast, they want you to do it yesterday. So, good luck on trying to understand that. One of the things we see is we talked about earlier was wireless versus wired networks. Wired networks require a local attack. Now, wireless networks allow for remote attacks. So, if a hacker wants to access you remotely, they can use like a Pringles can and be, a mile away or more and attack your wireless network. For a wired attack on your network that's allegedly not connected on the internet, uh, they actually have to have physical access to your network and get on your network that way. So that's one of the differences between a wired and wireless attack. Now, for the wired attack, I kind of think of that Mission Impossible movie where they go in there and Tom Cruise is hanging off the wires, typing on the keyboard while the guy ran to the restroom, and he's hacking in the stuff that way, and they pull him up at the very last second through the ceiling tiles and stuff. That would be a physical wired attack that way, where he was able to extract that information. Uh, Eavesdropping. This is where you can use a packet sniffer to kind of listen in on you know, the network traffic. Uh, there's a lot of different things. Networks General created a hardware sniffer. You can eavesdrop against data packets, or you can eavesdrop against digital voice traffic. Um, Setting up a sniffer is easy to do, and it can occur on both wired and wireless connections. To prevent eavesdropping, you implement data in motion in cryptography. This is the usage of things like SFTP, Secure File Transfer Protocol, Transport Layer Security TLS. Uh, if you're doing stuff like connecting to Oracle, you do Oracle Net Native Encryption. You encrypt your files before you transmit them. Stuff like that. These are things you want to implement cryptography enabled protocols while data is in motion. So eavesdropping on an existing server, an existing session between a client and a server, you just have to install that sniffer on that same segment of somewhere between 1 and 2, and between the client and the server, and just start copying all the packets up to you, and you reassemble them, and you can see a full conversation, or play it back like a full conversation locally. Hijack and replay attacks. Well, hijack attack occurs when a hacker uses a network sniffer to watch communication to learn the parameters. The hacker then says something and disconnects one of the hosts, and then impersonates the offline system and injects, packets into that communication stream. They usually, impersonate the MAC address and IP address, and so any of the intermediate devices doing security like firewalls or proxies don't see that as an issue, and they let that traffic pass. Well, at that point, the hacker then takes over the session of the offline host. A way to knock a host offline is like use something like a ping of death or something like that, which causes their network to just drop. There's also replay attacks, and this is where they use a network sniffer to capture the network traffic, and then you do some modification of it, and then you retransmit it at a later time to see if you can get the other system to react and provide access to the system from there, and then you could gain access to that system that way. All right, so let's look at a replay attack that collects authentication packets and then transmits the packets at a later time. So the hacker captures, the authentication tokens, they'd be SAML or OAuth or something, that might be unencrypted during transit. And then the hacker then retransmits them to the server at a different time saying, oh, here's my good token. I'm me, this is Joe, the client, instead of Sam, the hacker. So they go in there and they're able to pretend to be Joe, the client, instead of Sam, the hacker. They're using Joe's credentials. So that is something that they're out there trying to do. Insertion attacks. This is where information is modified and inserted. These can be like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, IDS insertion, and rogue device insertion. So let's break these down here. So one of the things we talk about also is the fragmentation attack. So this is an attack that uses the fragments of an offset packet. This is where you can edit a TCP/IP packet and has fragments in there. And this is by setting an artificially low MTU on a device, and the MTU stands for maximum transmission unit. So when you see an MTU that's set to be very low, like 500 bytes, instead of 1500 bytes, you're going to fragment what would normally be a single packet into 3 packets. What you can do is create some overlapping of information by overriding the datagram components and then creating new datagrams out of parts of previous. So what that does is it can create really large datagram packets, and they can either be used to cause the system to reassemble it and cause a buffer overflow inside the memory of one of these systems, which might put a command in there of allowing escalation of privilege. They can also be used to create a denial of service attack, which would cause the target system to just have a lot of performance issues and not be able to respond to a number of clients. Or it can also cause confusion for an IDS and firewall filtering systems out there. So these are what fragmentation attacks can do. Now, buffer overflows, this is where memory is designated for a program, and it is meant to just contain, this section of memory is only meant to have this much data, and we're going to say we're going to write to 10 spaces of data here, but you overflow it and you write to 15, and so you overwrite the buffer and it goes outside of the memory space, which could end up creating, let's say, a command shell thing, where a lot of times this is used to launch, an administrative command prompt or something against a system, and it is there. A lot of times when people do not create hard limits on buffers for this, and these are usually programs written in C or C++ or any object-oriented programming. These are where object-oriented attacks occur, especially when memory pointers are being used and there's no proper delimitation being set in those programming fields. So it can result in code injection or crashing of systems. We have session hijacking, spoofing, and man-in-the-middle attacks. A session hijacking attack is where you try and, well, all of these are where you're pretending to be somebody else. Session hijacking is, TCP session is there. You knock somebody offline and you just pretend to be that other node on the network. Spoofing attack is you're also pretending to be somebody else and saying, hey, this traffic is coming from something on the external network, and you're sending a whole bunch of packets and you're pretending to be, a different address on the internet, so all the return traffic is sent to somebody who's somebody could be just innocently out there on the internet, and all of a sudden they just get a whole bunch of return traffic and they're getting attacked from, or two systems are getting attacked, and you're launching, or the attacker's launching something against you, and then you're returning information back to the wrong source. And then you got the man-in-the-middle attack, where somebody is between the source and destination. They get in between and they act as a relay and they capture everything and do that. So systems that might be are where credentials are falsified and misrepresented out there. People can be posing as another entity or sending messages that the system is a different machine. So those are things out there that can be for that. Session hijacking is where the attacker takes over the connection after the authentication occurs. The attacker does not directly learn the credentials of the client. He just, kind of steps in and intercepts it and goes with that. Techniques are DNS spoofing, DNS poisoning, ARP spoofing, ICMP redirects, rogue DHCP services to alter the route or pathway of a session. Hosts that use TCP without encryption are very vulnerable to session hijacking. So always encrypt your stuff. Always use HTTPS, always use TLS, always use something like SFTP or something like that to encrypt data or encrypt your session as it traverses the network. Here's how it works. Hacker goes in, sniffs the thing, They can then go ahead and kick the client off, somehow redirect the traffic to them, and then they impersonate you using the credential and the tokens that you provided. They just take over that session and say they're you. Spoofing a text. This involves the falsification of information. They false the source of the identity. This can be email, uh, media access control, your physical address. You can go into your network card and change your MAC address. You can change your IP address. You do whatever it takes to impersonate the authorized entity. It's hard to prevent this and hard to detect. Um, so one thing you do to detect a spoofing attack, watch for addressing abnormalities. Um, a lot of times the way I would detect it in a network is a lot of times you see that there's a router or other things in the pathway, and then you'll see those pathways change. So they can change the source address of where it might be coming from if you see a spoofing attack, but then you'll see the router from what normally is coming from the source. You'll see different router MAC addresses and that pathway in those network traffic patterns out there. So you'll see different, NAT traversals and other things like that that are occurring. So here's an example. We have the hacker. His original uh, MAC address is this down here at the bottom, A4FC F2 10 17C8. He goes and modifies his NIC, and now it says 0C A9 47 59 BB 15, which is the same MAC address as the victim, and he basically impersonates the victim that way. So we have the man-in-the-middle attacks like the ARP spoofing, the MAC spoofing, the DNS poisoning. The ARP is address resolution protocol. This is how the MAC addresses, once you come onto a network, they announce themselves in a broadcast query to the switches, and then they get registered to a switch, and they're added to the spanning tree protocol. And what the switches have is a MAC table that maps to the sport. You have MAC spoofing, which the computer uses the server's MAC address and receives traffic instead of the intended server. So they intercept the traffic going to that. You have DNS poisoning, which uh, changes the DNS records for the FQDN and redirects the DNS traffic to the usually this attack is against a DNS cache, not against the actual records themselves. You can poison the cache or something of an intermediate server, so traffic might get redirected to a different server instead of the legitimate server where the FQDN to IP address is actually mapped. So those are some things out there. Um, the DNS spoofing, it's a non-authenticating query. Uh, so you don't need to authenticate. DNS is anonymous. So this allows false DNS records to be sent. We have ICMP redirects, which, a router can say, yeah, no, send that traffic to this and alter the routing host table, saying, hey, this route's no longer good, use this route, and then you can change routes to route traffic to a false address. You can manipulate the proxy by changing the client's proxy configuration. This can be through different things like a proxy config file that could be loaded to a client instead. There can be done through rogue DHCP servers, where somebody could set up a DHCP server, which could provide incorrect DNS and proxy information to a different system that might be set up to impersonate these things. And they can set up a wrong default gateway and a number of other configurations like that, which are bad. Then you can have a rogue access point. This is where people set up a fake wireless access point, uh, go into any airport and you can find that quote free internet. Click here, or free internet when you're scanning Wi-Fi's or something like that. Or you go in a Starbucks and it's a Starbucks free Wi-Fi or something like that. And you can catch which one of these, and they're acting as a man-in-the-middle proxy and trying to enter, they're trying to steal your credentials as you go through there. Here's a copy of like a man-in-the-middle response where, they go in there, they're acting as the intermediary, they capture that traffic between the source and destination, and they modify it and send it through and capture everything they need. All right, so covert channels are interesting. Covert channels are out there used for hidden information. It's not a typical pathway uh, of information transfer. Uh, so one of the stories I have is there was this, on airplanes they offer that pay-as-you-go Wi-Fi. So you open up your laptop, you click on your homepage, maybe it's msn.com, and it goes through, and then you get the Boingo, hey, you have to pay, you type in msn.com and all of a sudden it redirects and you have this Boingo, hey, you can join, American Airlines or Delta Airlines free or Wi-Fi internet service for only $39.99 for this flight. People were getting around this by setting up a uh, proxy at their home systems and sending traffic on port 53 because the Boingo was allowing people to actually resolve the address before it was redirecting it. So they were sending, quote, a lot of DNS traffic from their client, but instead they were hitting a proxy server that was allowing it to build web pages without that, retrieve connected web traffic without them actually having to pay for the Wi-Fi service. So they were using a covert channel, DNS, to get web traffic through a proxy. So that's, one example of a covert channel. Timing channels are, out there. There's synchronized activities. Morse code's a timing channel where you could create stuff out there for that. Then you have storage channels, which, if you ever look in your hard drive and say, oh, look, I bought a hard drive and it has 2 terabytes, then you go to format it and it's like 1.79 terabytes. And you're like, wait, where's another 0.21 terabytes? Well, that is hidden information on your hard drive. There's slack areas, this is designed for your fat table and all this other stuff. Well, a lot of times people can use programs like Disprobe and stuff like that to write data outside the normal aspects of what's the formatted space. So unless you're forensically examining a system, a lot of times information can be stored on a hard drive or a flash drive or somewhere outside of normal storage space that's recognizable by most tools that most people would look to use to examine it. So those are some examples of cover channels. All right, so here's a illustration of that slack space. So we have the stored file, and then we have the slack space, which is unused portion of the disk, the last cluster that's not written. And a lot of times information can be stored inside that slack space. Network resource and availability threats. So many attacks require special access on a private network. So that means, I have to get past the firewall and get on there and, get through the NAT and get somewhere local so I can get onto that private network. The availability attacks are a fallback option when attackers can't locate a vulnerable area to exploit. So I'm trying to make sure that, I'm going to knock them offline. This was popular in the mid 2010s, maybe 10, 12, about maybe 10 years ago, 10, 8, 7 years ago, where they would do these denial of service attacks and you would pay a ransom. Otherwise, you can get back online. Since then, companies like Cloudflare and stuff have come about, Akamai, where they, address distributed uh, systems out there. Radware came out with DDoS attack prevention, where they can go out there and have stuff on the network that can mitigate those, collect that information for those systems that are attacking you, and then have those all redirected into a null hub and, have them basically become neutered hosts at that point. So DOS and DDoS attacks were used to um, keep those systems offline and knock them down and utilize all their ports up there. But you don't see as much of that anymore as distributed mitigations and stuff have occurred. A lot of times now with the cloud, there's so many cloud spaces out there that they can become widely distributed. And they just will move them around real quick before even these DOS attackers can use their bot armies to attack. So you see these still, but not as much anymore. So basically, what it is a hacker uses a lot of systems to flood a host or system, and they just put too many packets in there, routers, the host system, the network card, and TCP. You have a limitation of 65,535 ports, minus well-known ports. You probably have about maybe 55,000 usable ports out there, and those can be easily all used up by, let's say, a SYN attack or something like that. Distributed denial of service attack, that's where the bot armies are, you have a command and control system on the internet, and he controls all these different soldiers, per se, they refer to them as, in a bot army, and they all send a lot of packets to a host and, kind of knock a single person offline or something. All right, and of course, we have great hacker tools out there. So I'm sure some of you have downloaded Kali Linux or Commander from Windows Commander. A lot of tools out there that you can see for open source operating system tools, custom code, um, for all that. Um, we see a way to make sure what is allowable on your network. Uh, there's stuff like Tripwire, which, creates a hash of a system and hash of all uh, programs that would be allowed on a system and their components. Um, so what you want to do is create a system saying, this is a catalog of tools that I want to allow on my system. And anything like a hacker tool should not be allowed to be installed on your network or on your system. So these are a whitelist or an allow list are system. They're just basically a catalog of software that is available for use on your system. Any application or something that is not on that list gets blocked by your anti-malware software solutions. Oh, the fun one, social engineering. Uh, in the last chapter, I asked you if you trust your classmates. Well, now is where it can get to be really fun. So, social engineering is developing that level of trust and rapport with somebody you shouldn't have rapport with because they're trying to gain your confidence and gain your trust. So they try and exploit human nature, basically. and they try and get you to do something like urgency or anything like that. Many of you may have taken some social engineering training where it's like, "Hi, I'm the CEO's assistant, and you're the only person I can get a hold of. I need you to, you know, allow me to get access to this," or something like that. Or you get somebody calling from your help desk to try and get you to give them your passwords so they can install a remote patch. Or if you're not on this, maybe you've gotten these calls from Microsoft support who tell you your system is spewing viruses on the internet and they need to help you get this patched. And if you just join this remote session or something like that, and they try and talk to you and get you to install something because people really are the weakest link and people are gullible. Um, it's amazing how many people can access places that they shouldn't access. If you go look at YouTube, there's YouTube about people saying if you have a couple people carrying a ladder, people will open the door for you and let you in. People walked into movie theaters without buying tickets by carrying a ladder, and they went into a movie theater, sat down, and watched a movie, and didn't pay for it. Nobody questioned them. Nobody asked them for tickets. Nobody even did anything. So they impersonated somebody with authority, and people actually opened the door and helped them in and let them go into places that they shouldn't access. Um, if you're carrying a clipboard around and you're checking it off, let's say, and you're walking around looking at your fire extinguishers and fire alarms and say, "Hey, excuse me, I need to check those in there." I guarantee you a security guard might actually let you in to check those without even asking your credentials. It's amazing how many people can fall for these social engineering tactics. Um, for those of you who have seen these old movies, you can see people do dumpster diving, where they jump in and grab, manuals and look for people's passwords. If any of you have ever watched the movie Hackers, you can see those guys do dumpster diving and they find, people writing their passwords on sticky notes or password lists and they just throw them in the trash. They're like, bingo, I'm in. Uh, they show them walking into buildings uh, dressed in UPS uniforms carrying, empty packages and saying, "I need to get so and so to sign for this directly," and they walk by and they're in. So again, the best defense is user training. With that, we come to the end of chapter 2, and this is where we have talked about hackers, their motivations, the hacking process, issues with hardware such as failures, physical threats, accidents, and other disasters, common types of malware, social engineering practices, and their ability to impact network efforts. Thanks, and we'll see you again in Chapter 3.